is Mapping the Road Ahead, Post-Pandemic RV Travel. For those of you joining here today from the Outdoorsy community and maybe even some of our partners, I wanted to, if you're joining for the first time, I wanted to just take a minute to tell you a little bit about why we started this series. Our goal when the world stopped traveling was to provide valuable information and resources for our full community, our full Outdoorsy community. But we really wanted to put specific focus around what kind of content and information was needed for our recreational vehicle, motorhome, and camper van owners. We wanted to hone in on addressing their concerns and questions that they had amidst the changing landscape and these sort of uncertain times. Overall, though, we always knew, even from day one, that the outdoor and travel industry would absolutely thrive in the future. And we were looking forward to maybe some new benefits that might come our way. The one that sticks out for me, I think, that a lot of us are experiencing is more family connectedness. I hear that from so many people that, we're in close quarters and we're getting back to the basics of spending time with these, with our relationships with our family, and wondering if this will extend further into wanting to continue to travel in close quarters in recreational vehicles and time spent outdoors. So our team at Outdoorsy wanted to be a positive voice during this transition and cover content about the big picture, as well as some of the specifics that you can do today in the marketplace. We have over 600,000 users or community members across the group, and our owners make up the heartbeat of this program. And there's a lot of questions from everybody. And while we're doing our best to pump out new content and emails and push everybody into our private Facebook groups, we also wanted to be able to launch this series of content to provide more information and really just make you guys feel confident about the future. So this series brings together some of the best industry experts, and our first panel, which we ran last month, focused on the general future outlook for the RV industry. The first questions really were, will RVing be safe? Is an RV safe? Will we ever be able to do rentals again? Will people want to rent vehicles? And if you missed that panel, please know that anybody on the call here today can go back to our blog post on outdoorsy.com and you can listen to that panel. We're transcribing it. We write a summary post of all of the great tidbits that our panelists suggest. So you can always go back and pick up that content. But for today's discussion, we're focusing on the topic that's on everyone's mind, as Memorial Day is literally around the corner and states are now starting to reopen for business. And those topics are really around destinations. Where to go, what destinations are going to be popular this year. So if all of our owners out there are thinking about these questions, how long will it be until renters will start booking on my platform? How long will it be before they can, safely go and book in a campground site? Will national parks be open? Will there be a difference between the parks and the state parks? What are some other suggestions for places people can go when they're in my rig? These are the kinds of questions that this panel addresses. So hopefully you'll find this one valuable as well. Today we've got an exciting group of experts with us from big travel magazines, heads of national parks and head of private parks. They're going to share their insights. And I wanted to allow everybody to introduce themselves, but just in terms of saving some time and allowing us to focus more on getting their answers to your burning questions, I'm going to start by introducing the panelists. Everybody's contact information will be made available, so you can feel free to reach out to them after them. But I'd love to start by introducing Theresa Pierno. Theresa, if you would just give a bit of a wave with the National Park print in the background. Teresa's the president and CEO of the National Parks Conservation Association. I think everybody agrees, a very impressive organization, which is considered to be the voice of and the leading advocate for America's 400 plus, I think it's 421 national parks. She started building that organization, I think back in 2004 with just a small field program, and she's grown it to a very sizable organization, which now covers 36 locations all across the country. Under her leadership, the NPCU's strategic focus is the thing we all care about the most as well, ensuring that parks stay protected, that they have resources and the infrastructure to thrive. So in addition to that, she also co-founded a specialist group called America's Great Water Coalition. So for those of you that are passionate water people, lakes and streams, maybe an interesting point to follow up with Theresa on, and she's running that organization as well. Also with us today is Toby ORourke. It's hard for me to see all of the faces, even in gallery view. So Toby, if you wouldn't mind waving. Her background is the brand colors we all know and love, yellow and red. Toby's the president and CEO of Campgrounds of America. I don't think I need to introduce that very much. I'm sure everybody on the call is familiar with the brand. It's been a pillar in North American camping history for 58 years. And they quite famously launch a North American camping study. And we're going to hear a little bit about that later on in the conversation. But KOA's system is pretty paramount for everybody on the call and renters as we look to travel this summer, because they cover over 520 private campground locations across the US and Canada, and they serve over 1 million camping families every year. I think they did about 8 million booked camping nights. So pretty significant customer base. Toby's been with KOA since 2011. And I mean, the list is long for all the roles that she's had. She lives in Montana, big avid hiker, fisher, loves national parks, friend of mine. And I'm really happy that she's here with us today. Thanks for joining us, Toby. And lastly, I'm excited to introduce Justin Housman. He is obviously a San Francisco native. You can pick that up from his background. But Justin is the lead editor for an awesome magazine called Adventure Journal. If you guys haven't checked it out, you should do that. It's focused on outdoors and news sites devoted to adventure, travel. Their audience is big. I think they get about 800,000 monthly page views. And they cover with specific focus recreational vehicle and camper van travel. So for those of you guys interested, check out their section called Overlandia, where they profile rigs and they talk a lot about van life and travel. He's a diehard outdoorsy type, definitely preferring to actually be outdoors, hiking, surfing, biking, fly fishing, backpacking. I mean, the list is long, than being online. I found out yesterday that this will be his second only ever Zoom meeting. So that definitely bucks the trend of all of us spending time on Zoom. And myself, my name is Jen Young. I'm one of the co-founders of Outdoorsy. I'm going to be moderating today's discussion with our panelists. And as I was just preparing for today's conversation, I was reflecting on the beginning days of when we started Outdoorsy, and we had a lot of obstacles. Pretty much everybody said, you'll never acquire a large community. This isn't going to be a thing. We faced a lot of obstacles similar to what's in front of us today, but we were always optimistic about what this brand and what this marketplace could stand for in the world, both in terms of providing big financial benefits for our owners, for RV owners, as well as just giving everybody access to get outside. We believed in the health and the wellness benefits that spending time outdoors and with people you love back then. That's why we started it. And I feel like this is the big role that we're all going to play as we look forward to resolving what's on the other side of COVID. So we've got a lot to cover today. Thank you guys very much. We're going to start with our prepared topics. And then the second half of our conversation today is going to be questions from everybody. So for everybody that's on the line, think as we're going through the topics, if you have any follow-up questions, and I'm going to make it available for everybody to submit those questions through this chat feature, and then I will ask our panelists here. So what are we covering today? These are our 4 big topics. 1, what are the specific destinations and types of travels across in-state, interstate? What do our experts predict to become most popular travel when a lot of our restrictions are lifted? What are going to be the new safety measures across national parks, state parks, private campgrounds that are going to be taken to protect travelers, and when will those measures be in place? We're going to try and dive into some great tips for all of the owners to be able to give renters ideas on figuring out where these destinations and recommendation, where they can find great recommendations for destinations during this time. And then what do we think are going to be the top trends? I'm sure everybody here is reading a lot about those today, and we're going to hear from Theresa and Toby and Justin about that. So right before we get into our discussion topics today, let me just do 3 quick housekeeping things, please. 1, if you've got a question during our conversation, we want to know about it, we want to hear it, please email it to panels@outdoorsy.com, or just send your question in the Zoom chat. The Outdoorsy marketing team is going to pick up all those questions and make sure that we have them for the end of our conversation. If we can't get to your question today, we do really great follow-up, working with all of the experts to like ask those questions, and then we include them in a post roundup series. So your question will definitely be answered. And then I think everybody's automatically been muted, which is helpful, but if not, just be mindful that you'll have to like click that microphone button on and off if you're either speaking or want to go on mute. So thank you very much for that, guys. Okay, that was a bit of a mouthful, but a lot of information and pretty exciting opportunity here with everybody on the line. So let's kick off by talking about popular destinations. I think it goes without saying that COVID's had a pretty big impact on shutting down most of the popular tourist attractions today, certainly around the globe and definitely in the US. I still remember being shocked when I got the news that Disneyland was closing. That for me was like an indication that this was the real deal. Then Las Vegas, and then the real big news hit when our park shut down. So with all of these changes over the last few weeks, though, in terms of states reopening, we're starting to see some bookings pick up. And I wanted to start by getting a read from our panelists on what they're seeing and what they're hearing and thinking are going to be the popular destinations this summer. You know, big or small parks, in-state, out-of-state, et cetera. And I'd love to kick it off with Theresa. What do you think is going to be popular for destinations, and maybe specifically focused in your area around the parks?
Hi, Jen. Well, thank you very much for having me. Really pleased to be here today and to be leading. I just want to say NPCA has been around 100 years. We celebrated our centennial last year, and I'm really proud to have been with them 15 years and been part of that growth. You know, this is extraordinary times, right? So we've never seen anything like this. And what we're seeing already and continuing now with parks slowly reopening is that people are flocking to them. And so we do expect to see some of the iconic parks seeing large numbers of people. Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, Yosemite, many of those parks are seeing out-of-state license plates already that have just opened up. And so we expect people to be, you know, certainly many staying more local, but people willing to still kind of get in the car and drive to some of these parks that are a little further away. So it's going to be really important as we move forward that we are providing information and really giving people what they need to know before they venture out. But I think national parks, certainly state parks, are going to be really popular destinations, given some of the concerns that people have with general, you know, airplane travel and just travel at large.
So you think the popular and the iconic national parks are still going to be well visited? And what's your point of view on some of the smaller, lesser known ones, maybe some of the secret gems?
Well, we actually are going to be encouraging people to go to those smaller, lesser known ones. So instead of what you might normally, you know, go out to a Yosemite or Sequoia National Park in California, think about Kings Canyon or some of the smaller shoulder parks that don't get the kind of attention that many of the larger iconic do, but where you can really practice that social distancing and get that peace and serenity that you achieve from the outdoors with far fewer people. So, you know, that's what, and we're going to provide information on our park tracker about some of those smaller parks, so people can go to npca.org to get that information and continue to, you know, encourage people to really venture closer to home maybe during this time, rather than those larger road trips that they would normally take.
Cool. I mean, Toby, what is it? What's in the viewfinder from a private campground perspective? Are you seeing anything that came out of the new North American camping survey that is giving us a nod for what destinations will be popular or what your campers will be choosing?
Sure, thanks, Jen. Yes, last week we published in a report called the North American Camping and the Effects of COVID-19. It was a special report in our series of North American camping reports that we've been publishing for 6 years now. And some interesting insights, very positive for the industry. One, that people are definitely looking to camp this summer and people are looking to road trip. Even people that have never done either of those activities before are saying that those are attractive forms of travel to them. Even ranking camping as the safest form of travel, which is exciting. Moving to destinations, we did ask people the max distance they would be willing to travel this summer once they're able to and restrictions lift. And 70% of people felt they were going to be camping closer to home than they had in the past. And in getting more specific, about 50%, 46% said they would camp within 100 miles of home, and 66% would be camping within 200 miles of home. That's pretty typical of what we see in general about campers, is they do camp closer to home. I definitely don't dispute that there's people that take longer road trips to see destination sites like the parks, but by and large, for the majority of camping activity, it happens in people's backyards. We did ask also about where they would be seeking, and there was some interest in the survey that showed that people would be seeking out less crowded destinations. So that may give a nod to some of those less frequently visited national parks that Theresa was just mentioning.
Yeah, definitely crowds and the big city destinations are not going to be the rage for summer travel this year. I'm curious to know, just, I mean, you've got such a huge audience, a huge readership. What are you hearing are the most sort of like popular stories right now, or what your readers want to hear about? Anything different in terms of destinations or things that readers are considering for travel this year versus last, or that were popular last year?
Yeah, definitely. Our website and our magazine as well tend to focus on more evergreen stories. So, you know, pieces are going to be relevant 5-10 years from now as well. So like in the past, those are normally our most popular stories. But I just before the call was running through like what the most popular, what the most highly trafficked stories of the past 30 days have been. And they are, oddly enough, webcams of national parks, webcams of animals, like people just like dying to see something outdoors that they can't see in their regular life, which I was kind of shocked. We've seen things on like really popular stories, or how to take your kids on adventures. Like what's the best sort of method of getting, you know, 3 or 4 kids in a car and driving for 1,000 miles? Like how does that work? What that sort of thing. Essays about how people are coping with not being able to do their favorite activity now are huge. So a lot of people clearly are trying to identify with fellow travelers, fellow adventurers, and trying to figure out, you know, how am I supposed to sort of navigate this right now in a pretty uncertain sort of moment. Like people trying to gather like strength from each other. So clearly there's just a longing to be outdoors that we don't normally, obviously you don't normally see that in the past because people can do whatever they want to do. We've also seen a big uptick in pieces that we've done in the past on how to work from the road. So I work remotely, I have for many, many years. And so I have a nice dedicated mobile office set up with a mobile hotspot. I know where I can go and camp and get cell service and work from there. And that stories that I've done about that have gone through the roof. So people are clearly, I think, probably kind of forecasting what their life is going to look like after this. And they're thinking, okay, wow, you know, if I can travel more and work from the road more, and that seems to be the case, especially here in the Bay Area, remote work is off the charts in terms of popularity. And so I think, you know, that's something that people have been kind of like casting about for as well. So to sort of sum up and answer that question, I mean, we've definitely gone from a year ago this month. Most of our most popular stories would have been, you know, these very like thought-provoking essays that you could read anytime. But now it's clearly people that are looking for information about how they can get outside, where they can go. And if they can't do that, at least they can look at something on a webcam. It's been pretty interesting to see.
That was so much helpful information. In terms of the webcams and things to see, I think actually Theresa and her team might even have some video content of parks. So we'll get to that a little bit later. We're going to wrap up at the end of the call with a good resource list for everybody here where they can go and check out all this stuff. But what I loved about all of your conversations there is that or comments there is that, you know, whether people are going to travel within a close radius of 100 miles or across interstate, or if they are just staying in closer to home backyards, there's still lots of opportunity to get outside and be active. And that's picking up on that last point you were talking about, Justin, right? It's like whether they're going to a big park or a small park, people just want to get outside and do the basics. Go for a hike, get a sweat, get some fresh air, feel the nature and their environment all around them. So Whether or not we're confined or we can't work with, or we can't travel within groups, we know that there's still lots of awesome places to go to. That's really cool to hear from everybody. Second part of our conversation here, just wanted to like focus in on, you know, some of the realities of what we have to face today, and those are protective measures. I mean, there is a lot of conversation around cleanliness and safety measures. Again, I'm going to start with Theresa because I am just dying to get the 411 on what are we going to experience when we're traveling in national parks. Are we going to see any kind of like plexiglass or, you know, fewer people working in the parks? Can you let us know what travelers can expect to experience when they visit parks?
Yes, well, thank you, Jen. Well, that's a great question. And, you know, one of the things that we're recommending is that before people do travel, if they're going to go to national parks, particularly out of state, that they look online. They certainly can look at the information we're putting out there on Park Tracker, as well as some of the work for our roadmap to reopening national parks, because every national park is different. There are different state rules and opening requirements, and some parks are in several states, so they have, you know, varying different degrees of requirements. But in general, what you're going to see is also some parks are doing reservations and looking at how they can do timed entry. So it's going to be really important to know where you're going and what the actual rules are for that park, because again, as I said, they're all different, as well as what is going to be open and what isn't. Some visitor centers will still remain closed. Some will be open. Some activities will be, you know, campgrounds will be open, but they may allow half the number of campers that they normally would allow. And also, as you know, that this is always a busy time for bringing in seasonal rangers, and that they play such a critical role during this time of year. And unfortunately, they have not been able to go through that interview process and bring in the numbers that are needed. So unfortunately, many of the larger parks are going to be challenged with staffing issues as well. And then some of the other things you need to look at is what's happening in the community. And I would make sure you're aware, are restaurants or hotels or other things open in the gateway communities that surround these parks? Are there issues you need to be aware of corona outbreaks? You know, just the kinds of things that you wouldn't normally do, as well as what kinds of supplies might be available. And so I think doing that kind of homework, and certainly, you know, we're going to be providing detailed information on individual parks. We're also, as you mentioned, the video cam, you know, looking at the kind of video real time of what is happening in parks. And unfortunately, right after Yellowstone opened, we saw crowds forming around Old Faithful, you know, not wearing masks, not 6 feet apart, and, you know, really, you know, just there en masse. And so if those things continue to happen, we may see changes in individual parks where they start closing off areas or even restricting access further. So I think it's going to be a constant moving kind of issue where we're going to have to monitor and all make sure we're doing the preparation we need to do in advance.
Yeah, definitely planning is going to be key because, as you say, it's a moving target. So while we might have a good set of measures now, that could change based on how renters and or travelers choose to, you know, follow them or not. Two quick questions for you. I'm dying to know these. Are there going to be any different measures in place or any changes to some of the like experiences? Like, will we see any changes to the biking or hiking trails? Will they also have like smaller access? And then my second question is, what do you think about travelers being able to just like show up the same day? Is that like an absolutely no way, like you better do your planning and you got to make sure you have an entrance pass, or can people still have that level of some flexibility?
Yeah, good questions, Jen. I think what we're already hearing from the Park Service and seeing is that some of the most popular trailheads or those areas that tend to be gathering points are going to be limited to the number of people that can go there, as well as some of them might even be closed off to avoid crowds gathering in those areas. So there will be changes and limits, and some of the kinds of, whether it's rafting or various different activities that the rangers put together that require bringing groups together are also going to be limited, and many of those will not occur. And again, as far as showing up, it's possible that you could show up, but if you're traveling in a distance, you don't want to take a risk that you get there and you missed maybe the time to opening when the park opens. So now you have to wait a whole nother day before you can get in, or where there are reservations and things required. So I would suggest that people really plan ahead and make sure that there are no surprises, or at least they limit it as much as possible.
Awesome. And then just lastly, Theresa, who's in charge of making these decisions? How does that sort of work? And would you and your organization be a really good place, though, for like up to date resources on the rules around openings and occupancy and any of the new restrictive measures?
Well, another great question. The problem is that there isn't any one entity in charge. We had hoped that there would be clearer guidelines coming out of the Department of Interior, but unfortunately the Secretary is really kind of allowed states and given guidance that superintendents need to look at what states are doing, and so there's really conflicting guidance and direction around the country. So it's not uniform, which certainly makes it more challenging for the average person. And yes, I would suggest that NPCA, because we are every day and day out having these conversations on the ground and monitoring the situation, that if they come to npca.org, they look at Park Tracker, they look at our roadmap to reopening, they'll get the information they need that will help them be able to make good decisions. But there isn't just one person managing the entire system of parks, unfortunately, in this reopening.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So Toby, what does it look like on the other side in terms of like private campgrounds? I mean, I've been to a lot of KOAs and some of them are pretty luxurious. You've got a ton of guest amenities like swimming pools and playgrounds and stores and game rooms. What are you what are you doing to put in place what you feel are appropriate safety measures given our new world?
Sure. So the first thing, we always have to default to the state or the local county restrictions that are placed, which there are all different across the country and in Canada as well. So sometimes we're not allowed to open the pools, for example, or we have group gathering restrictions, or we have capacity restrictions enacted by the government regulations. So we follow those. On top of that, though, we put together a pretty extensive operations manual that each of our campgrounds is using to build a customized plan about how they're going to operate their park. And then we encourage them to use that to communicate with their guests about what to expect, train their staff, and then also review that every 30 days or as every new phase comes into play in their local area. So things you're going to see are modified check-in procedures, trying to make them as contactless as possible, eliminating the need to come into the store to register, have someone meet you outside and get you as quickly as possible to your site. You're going to see, like I said, pools closed, playgrounds closed in many parts, not everywhere. Sometimes bathrooms are required to be closed. For all three of those examples and group gathering facilities, if they are allowed to be open, we're obviously putting in place increased cleaning procedures in terms of frequency and what exactly is cleaned, making sure all the products are EPA approved, and then posting those for consumers so that they feel safer about engaging in those areas. And then obviously use of PPE, you're going to see face masks and hand sanitizer. And we take social distancing pretty seriously, whether that's in the store, keeping people 6 feet apart, and even outdoors. So there's ample space naturally on a campground between sites, but in some areas we may have to add a little more space or make those campsites every other space. Sometimes we're required to do that, or we just need to make sure we don't have any clusters occurring where more people can gather. So we work pretty closely with the local officials to make sure we're following every guideline there is, just to keep employees and guest safety in mind.
Yeah, I think KOA has done such a great job from the beginning of just keeping everybody informed on all of the changes and procedures. And I'm assuming the same thing will occur for the private campgrounds as it will with the national parks, that depending on how people react to these new measures, you might have changes still to become. So it'll be really important to just stay informed. Again, at the end of this session, we'll make sure that everybody has the list of resources that they should bookmark. And Outdoorsy has a resources page dedicated as well, and it's a site that accumulates all of the industry resources. I got to say, one thing that really stands out for me listening to both you and Theresa and Toby is, with the amenities shutting down or having more restrictions, or some of the visitor centers also not opening at full scale, it's kind of, it's shining a spotlight on the benefits of an RV itself, because with a recreational vehicle, you've got your bathroom, an outdoor shower if you need it, a kitchen to keep your food. I mean, it's such a self-contained, awesome vehicle to have for any of the travel, because you don't have to worry about being so reliant on the amenities in the parks, whether it's the national ones or the private ones. So that was a point that really stood out to me. Okay, so just moving on to one last question before we get into Q&A. I know that there's hundreds of questions that I'm already seeing come in, and want to give everybody a chance to, ask you guys directly. But I'm excited to hear from Justin, because I feel like he's got his finger on the pulse of travel trends right now. I mean, he's got such a big audience, and he manages the whole editorial and content calendar of what subjects should be discussed. I know you were talking, and we've all sort of talked a lot about backyard travel, local travel, new activities within the realm of local travel. Can you give us a rundown on what you think is popular, or can you give us a rundown on what is popular?
Sure. So one of the things that we're probably going to be focusing on a lot in the coming months is self-contained travel, as you were just talking about. And that might mean something a little different for us. Like, we don't necessarily always, we cover like cool rigs and adventure vehicles and stuff like that. But we're going to focus a lot more on how to do that with your own vehicle. So, for example, I've been building out my Subaru over the last few months with, to the point where I can take it anywhere I could possibly need to go. So we're going to be doing, stories about how to take whatever car you have and kind of build it out into the most effective, adventure vehicle you can make. Specifically because there's no seemingly guarantees right now on where you can go, what parks are going to be open, this, that, and the other thing. So if you want to just hop in the car and, drive on a highway you've never seen before, boom, you can do that. Maybe you find some off-road places you hadn't seen before, you can do that too. So we're going to be doing a lot more sort of how-tos on how to make that sort of thing happen. And those stories are always big with us. They've been big with us anyway, but lately, some of the most popular stories that we've done are covering, cool adventure vans that you can buy in Europe that you can't buy in the States. People trying to figure out ways that they can get access to rental camper vans. Our top, we've been around for about 10 years. I think the number 3 most popular story we've ever done is what are the best camper van and RV rentals in North America. So people are flocking for that sort of thing. They want to see where they can get them. They want to see what they're going to look like and what they can do with them. So how-tos around that are going to be huge with us. We also are going to be focusing a lot on, we noticed too that typically I would say about 60% of our traffic are new readers. Lately, over the last month, it's been 80% of our traffic has been new readers. So we're whether that's people just discovering us for the first time, although I suspect it's a bit more people that are just interested in outdoor activities more than they were in the past. So we are going to be doing a lot more coverage on how to actually sort of behave in the outdoors, if that makes sense. We feel like there's probably going to be a lot of people that don't kind of know what to expect if they're getting into the backcountry, if they're getting into places that they haven't been to before. How to leave no trace, how to leave the parks in a better place than when you found them. One of the things that we keep seeing in comments like crazy is people referring back to in California when Joshua Tree was closed during the government shutdown last year, the year before. Same thing with Yosemite parks getting trashed, people using the bathroom where they shouldn't, people vandalizing things, people stealing toilet paper, all that kind of stuff. And so, we realize that there are a lot of people that don't normally get outdoors, and this is a new thing for them. And so they need sort of mentors and guidance on how to protect these places that we all love and that maybe you're seeing for the first time. So we'll be doing a lot more of those sorts of pieces. We just ran an essay a couple weeks back about how there's lots of new people outdoors. If they're coming from a place where they weren't raised to go outdoors, they need mentors, they need guides, they need people to show them kind of how to treat these places. And so we'll be doing a lot more things like that. So we're seeing a huge uptick in new readers. We're seeing a huge uptick in people that are looking for how-to articles. Anecdotally, where I live, I've never seen the trails so crowded. I mean, it's incredible. And at first it seemed like maybe people were just trying to get out because they were bored, but it's clearly now you're seeing a lot of the same faces on a lot of these new trails. I think that that's a pretty big indication that people have taken this last 2 months or whatever it's been that we've been on lockdown and have worked the outdoors into their lives in ways that maybe wasn't before, and are realizing what an amazing resource it is. And they are, I'm predicting a pretty robust travel season in the upcoming months, probably mostly locally. And when I say locally, I mean within like 1,000 miles, which I'm in California. That's not that far to drive really to go see somewhere that you want to go. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on for sure.
I'm feeling good about your prediction. I'm glad that's what it is. And Justin, you're such a wealth of knowledge. You're a resource in itself. And as you're talking, it's making me think two things. One, I think Outdoorsy should probably do some work partnering with you, specifically in Adventure Journal, on those how-to content. I think we could really dive in, because this is all new territory, and address some of the things that you were just talking about, like how travelers should behave and operate to, protect the outdoors as much as possible, as well as provide insight and information around like where to go in new places that you haven't been to before, or not obvious for how to travel there. So I'd love to partner with you on getting some of that how-to content. The other big takeaway for me around local travel guides is our community. I mean, it's one of the cool things about a brand like Outdoorsy. We don't own the vehicles. We're not an RV manufacturer. We're a marketplace made up of 600,000 people, and who could be better equipped to be local travel guides? So first thing I'm thinking is wanting to communicate to our owners out there. Look, renters are coming to you to find out, where should I go? Where should I stay? So now's probably the time to dust off, like, what were the best recommendations you've got for trails and lakes and waters and parks nearby, and pulling together that content, which you can make available in your listing page or in your dashboard, et cetera. So anyway, I love that. I think partnering with you, Justin, on some of the how-to content is a definite thing we should do. And I know that our community will make some pretty awesome local travel guides this summer. Okay, so two comments here for resources, and then we're gonna get into Q&A. We have a dedicated page on our blog, which is our Outdoorsy COVID FAQ page. That's going to cover all of these panelists' recommendations that they've just gone through. The roadmap for reopening from NPCA, the park tracker from NPCA, and video cams, the North American Camping Report from KOA, and then Justin, the how-to content you've been talking about. Also, we have the Facebook group, the private closed Facebook group for owners. There is a blue tile, it's labeled announcements, and all the resources are gonna be linked there. Okay, so hopefully that was a bit of a nice segue. I'm gonna open up with questions from the audience and start to just pass them over to the panelists here. Okay, so here is one, and it's about state parks. So I think that makes it pretty straightforward for Theresa. The question is, my wife and I were planning to take a road trip to Zion National Park once it reopens, but we're really worried about overcrowding. Should we consider going to a park that's less crowded and saving Zion for a future trip, maybe next year? Or are there ways that we can still visit Zion and do it responsibly? What's your advice on a big park versus a smaller park?
Yeah. No, I would definitely recommend, and particularly as it pertains to Zion, it's one of my favorite parks, but the challenging opportunity at Zion to stay away, kind of to really keep that distance, it's very difficult because of just how you get in and out. And so, you would need to get on a shuttle, and you're with other people very close. And then just the trailheads, it's almost impossible. Angel Landing, what a beautiful trail that is, but it's just impossible to separate. So I would say save Zion, because it's really a wonderful park, but save it for next year when you can go and really enjoy it fully. And I would absolutely suggest going to some of those more far out that are not as popular locations. And you can go on our site and certainly get recommendations and see what some of those parks are that would be in the region and not too far out of the way, that would be far less traveled. But I would, like Zion and Bryce and some of those that are very popular, I would avoid this year because it's going to be difficult to keep that social distancing.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for being so definitive as well. That was a great answer. Hopefully it helped our owner. This is, oh, sorry. Any other comment on that point?
I just wanted to add to that, one of the other things that you know, especially in near Zion, that it's possible that people don't necessarily think of, is that BLM land is there for the taking. I mean, like southwestern, you know, like Colorado, Utah, Arizona, that whole area is like nothing but BLM land. And especially if you have a self-contained vehicle, I would probably want four-wheel drive, but I mean, I know there's a lot of those on Outdoorsy, but if you're, exactly as Teresa's saying, I wouldn't go to Zion right now, but there are spectacularly beautiful places that you can go to that you won't see a soul on BLM land. That's free, it's open, it's there, and especially if you're self-contained, you don't really have to worry about facilities being open or amenities being open. So just that, I would throw that out there for sure for anybody interested in avoiding the big places right now.
That's a great point.
Yep, totally agree. Thank you, Justin. Okay, this one is a US-Canada issue. So I'm going to throw it over to Toby for sure. It's a big one. I'm going to read it verbatim. Are any of today's speakers prepared to identify or address the Canadian restrictions? Everything so far is more focused on the US, but we're experiencing very different limitations here in Canada. And in particular, what does it look like for renters looking to take RVs across the Canada-US border? I can also follow up, Toby, from an Outdoorsy perspective on what our position is on that, but can you please talk more about Canada-US? You run a business, 600 locations across both of those countries.
Right, yeah, I can speak to what I know about Canada. So it is much more restrictive in Canada in terms of province by province openings and where they're at in allowing camping to happen. So as of right now, there's only 3 provinces that have campgrounds back open fully. There's obviously guidelines in place at the provincial level, but that's Alberta, Manitoba, and New Brunswick. Newfoundland, Labrador, PEI, Saskatchewan are completely closed down for camping right now. And then the rest can take in some form of camping, but it's mainly essential business or long-term RVers. Ontario within the past week has allowed seasonals to come back, but you can have no short-term business. So there's by and large no short-term business happening in Canada for the most part. Now that's, as we get closer to June and into June, that's going to change. But what we see is that a lot of those in the initial phases will be locked down to residents just of that province. So you may be able to camp overnight, but you would have to be a resident of the province. So they definitely have a much more restrictive approach to opening back up than what we're seeing here in the US. In terms of crossing the border, as of right now, the border date is set to June 24th or June 21st for the border to open back up. And I don't have a read yet if that'll get extended or not. I think a lot of that will depend on what's happening, you know, over the next few weeks in terms of cases on both sides of the border. And that's obviously has a big impact on campgrounds for both countries because a lot of people cross back and forth. And I'll let Jen, maybe you can speak about the renters going back and forth because I don't have intimate knowledge about that. I just know about where we're at from a restriction standpoint.
You know what, you covered it so well by talking specifically about the updated dates in terms of when the overall border opens and then the specifics around the individual provinces. And we are adhering to those same guidelines. Once the border is open, however, in terms of our terms of service, we won't be imposing any additional restrictions on whether or not vehicles can cross border. Our insurance will cover that travel. We've done so many cross-border rentals. I think it will be more business as usual. But what I love about the Canadians, having been born there as well, is that they are very responsible people. So, you know, when they make that decision and they're reopening it, I feel like it's a very solid mark of confidence that your renters or yourself, for the people joining the call, will be free and confident to be able to travel. Canada's as beautiful as America is in so many ways. In particular, the Rocky Pass through BC and Alberta is like one of my favorite drives of all time. So I'm looking forward to that border being open up for sure. I'm going to just ask you another question straight up, Toby, because it's regarding one of your properties specific to KOA. So this question is, my daughter and I stayed at Mount Rushmore KOA at Palmer Gulch Resort a couple years ago, and we had an absolute blast. Okay, that's good. It's sad to think that a lot of the activities though, like the splash pad and the climbing wall and the nightly shuttle rides to see the lights of Mount Rushmore. Wow, this park sounds fantastic. I should probably do a trip here. Anyway, it says, she says, it's sad to think that the climbing wall and the nightly shuttle rides to see the lighting of Mount Rushmore will be at a commission when the parks reopen. Is there a timeline when y'all are hoping to plan to bring back those features again?
Yeah, Mount Rushmore KOA is one of the best in our system. Highly recommend it to anybody looking for a great destination-oriented park. It's 8 miles from the Mount Rushmore itself, so it's a beautiful location as well. I do know that they have different phases that they're implementing in terms of when things will open up. So South Dakota was interesting in that it never had stay-at-home orders, and it didn't have a lot of the business restrictions that we see in other states. So the owners of the Mount Rushmore KOA are, implementing practices they think are in the best interest of guests and employees at this time. This is a very large park. There's a lot of people that camp and work at the Mount Rushmore KOA. But so I can't speak specifically to their timelines, but I have spoke with the owners recently, and I do know they're working on phased approaches. So the president is supposed to be coming to Mount Rushmore July 4th weekend, and I know they're hoping to have as much of their operations in progress or open and operating before that happens, because their reservations have jumped off the books in anticipation of the president's visit. So I think, you're going to see over the course of June, more and more things open up at Mount Rushmore and other parks like that.
That's great. Thank you for that. I love this question. Justin, I'm curious, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not comfortable at all and 10 being super comfortable, how comfortable would you feel flying right now or staying in a hotel? What do you think it would take for you to feel more comfortable going back to those modes of travel?
That's interesting. My wife and I were talking about that last night as we were sort of fantasizing about going to Hawaii. Personally, I would feel probably like an 8. I don't have any hard sort of like data behind that or anything like that, but I feel like, geez, if I would take my own, safety precautions, obviously with a mask and hand sanitizer and gloves and that sort of thing. But I would, if I felt like, I didn't have to deal with like a quarantine when I got to where I was going, that would be my main concern. I believe, I could be wrong, I believe Hawaii is doing like a 14-day quarantine, for example. So, if that wasn't the case, to be quite honest, I would probably be trying to talk my wife into doing that right now, to take our daughter out to, just to get out of the city for a little while. So, and staying in hotels, yeah, I think I would do that too. I mean, again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an epidemiologist. I have absolutely no hard evidence to support anything I'm saying. But, we've done a pretty good job here in San Francisco of limiting the pandemic spread. I mean, our numbers are tiny. And I think it's because a lot of us have done the right thing with masks and gloves and hand sanitizer and all that sort of stuff. And so I kind of feel like at this point we've learned kind of what to do and what not to do. So I would absolutely do that. I mean, my other concern too would be impacting small communities. That's kind of been the main concern. My boss and I had to cancel a huge trip in March, driving out to Moab to do a bunch of gear testing and stuff like that. And part of it was that we weren't sure what was going to happen. This is kind of in the early phases, but also it was because, we don't want to bring something to a small town somewhere that they're not prepared to deal with. So that would be my other concern. Like around here, if you go to some of the small rural communities in Northern California, there's giant signs that say "Stay at home," like spray painted signs everywhere. So I wouldn't want to necessarily show up in some little community somewhere that doesn't want me there. I mean, it sounds bad, but that's the case. But so those would be my concerns: quarantines, not wanting to impact small communities. But 8, maybe even 9, 10. Yeah, I would totally fly. I would be fine doing that for sure.
That was a great answer. Also, really good point on that extra quarantine. It's like if you choose to fly somewhere, you might be tacking on another 14 days to your holiday, which It doesn't sound like the worst idea. That seems like a pretty great excuse for your boss, right? Sorry, I flew and I can't actually, come back to work for another 14 days after that. I'm not with you though on the hotels. I don't know what it is, but I feel like the allure of being in a crowded single building with hallways and bed sheets and lots of people, I don't know. I know I'll go back to it one day, but the great thing about our business and the outdoors is you can take your hotel with you. And I am definitely on that side of the playing field. It's like, I'll take my hotel with me and I can be as, clean or as, control any level of environment I want to. But definitely, that's not a forever thing. We want to be able to support all forms of travel for sure. Here's one question around small communities. I don't know exactly what it is until I read it, but you were just mentioning something, Justin. So let me ask you this one. This question asks, I have a lot of backlash, especially on social media, criticizing people for traveling into small communities and touting the benefits of social distancing. There's concern for the people who live in the communities and their limited access to hospitals if they were to contract the virus. How should we think about the smaller populations? Oh, when parks start to reopen, maybe this one is also for Theresa as well. Or should we believe that with the right social distancing precautions, everyone's going to be okay?
Yeah, I mean, we're fielding those questions all the time on our website as well. And I think our readers tend to skew toward the more maybe cautious about that sort of thing. We have a lot of readers that are in these small gateway communities. I would imagine that 90% of our regular readers are in places like Moab or Boulder or what have you, something like that. Not that Boulder's that small, but still, and I wish there was a resource for that sort of thing. I don't know that there is. I would love to be able to sort of tap into some kind of community network where you could look at a tiny town somewhere, maybe Bishop, California or something like that, and get to find out what are the small businesses doing and saying. I mean, maybe you can, if you could check in with local leaders in the communities that you're going to, that's what maybe I would try to do. But I think that that's a very valid concern. I think that that's something that is on the forefront of a lot of travelers' minds right now, and it certainly would be on mine. I'm planning a trip with my wife in July, a road trip, and we're gonna be as self-contained as we possibly can. Get all of our groceries here, gas up here as much as we can, so that we are minimizing our impact in those places, which is painful because one of our favorite things to do is to go into small towns and go to their local brewery and go to their local bakery and stuff like that. But maybe the kind of thing where you feel it out. If you show up in town and there's lines outside the bakery, then okay, it's probably okay. But other than that, I wish there was a better resource, but I don't know. I don't even know how you would find that.
I can.
Well, oh, Theresa, and I've got a good segue for you here too. So it's a double barrel question, because I liked how Justin was talking about minimizing his impact. That's a nice way to think about it as you're preparing a trip or planning a trip. And I have a specific question from Guy in our group for you, Theresa, around that concept. He says, I've been reading articles about the trash problems at parks. Is there anything that we should do to help, or should we be concerned that this could cause a park to not open? So maybe you could pick up with your comments from the last question and then add in to answer Guy's question there.
Sure. Yeah, as far as the impact on the small communities, it was actually many of the small gateway communities around parks that put the pressure on the National Park Service to finally close. And it was the community of Gardner that finally really pushed the Yellowstone National Park closing. And it was because, they don't have the kind of healthcare system. They're small populations. So if you have people coming there and potentially impacting the health of that community and they don't have the services, it's a really serious situation. So I think it is important to really respect and look and do your research and really not be inundating small rural communities with large populations from out of town. That's kind of a recipe for disaster. I think packing your own stuff and being self-contained as much as possible is critical. I think the other issue related to trash, we have seen, when parks were closed previously during the federal government shutdown and the trash problems that impacted parks. And certainly at MPCA, we really encourage that pack in, pack out, kind of leave no trace, and really reducing your own footprint. We also have, over the last several years, been partnering with Subaru something called zero landfill in 3 national parks, Yosemite, Denali, and Grand Teton, and using the kinds of techniques that Subaru has really mastered in their own plant to be able to be a zero landfill in a Subaru car plant, and then to be able to look at how does the park operate and what are those ways in which you can really reduce the footprint. And it's been great to see the reduction in landfill and trash in these different parks where that's been piloted. And so that's something we would hope to expand well beyond. So there's a lot that people can do and concessionaires can do to reduce the waste and the waste problem.
Great answer. Thank you for that. I'm going to roll into another quick question from you, and we only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get through as many of our questions. They just do not end. But very quickly for you, Theresa, in your opinion, what is the single greatest challenge right now that the National Park Service is up against as the parks are slowly starting to reopen? Is it staffing? Is it the safety of the park visitors? Or is it restroom facilities and visiting centers not being able to open at scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the lack of resources, that combination of lack of resources, and remember, they've lost significant resources as well, and funding and staffing in that, and then inundated with potentially large crowds coming from all over the country to some of these iconic parks without the resources and the staffing in place, just really sets them up for a bad situation to happen at this time of social distancing and this virus that is just unknown what it's going to react and how it's going to react. So I think it's really, it's a frightening time for many of the park staff and that unknown. So I would say it's important to, really think before you go and make sure that you try to stay away from some of these iconic parks that would draw crowds and go to some of the lesser known. You'll have a much better time, safer time.
Thank you for being so clear, by the way, with your answers. It's refreshing. It's great. I can knock off 2 questions quickly, and then we'll have one more for each of us, and we can move to close this call. So one question was, let me just see if I get it. One question was, is there an industry association for RV travel? I can answer that one quickly by saying, yes, there is. The two that I would, the two that are the foremost and largest is the RVIA, the RV Industry Association, and then also the RVRA. We'll have links to those associations and then all of their actual properties. I think one of the famous ones is Go RVing, which is a campaign that really provides a lot of education, information, and resource around that. So there's 2 resources there. Another question, which I think actually this one is even for me, from Thomas Amura. The question is, I had some success investing my rental earnings into my own marketing. When do you think it's a good time to do this again? Great question. And also, thank you for doing that. That's lovely. Love to hear that you feel confident and want to fuel your own business as well. I think it is safe to do that again, but if money is tight as it is for everybody right now, what I would suggest is, instead of focusing on any kind of paid marketing spend, in my point of view, the most valuable thing that recreational vehicle owners can do is start to build out local recommendations, travel recommendations. Where should your renters or your prospective customers, where should they stay? What parks should they visit and stay at? What providing nearby activities, some new ones. So like, go back into your memory banks of the 5 to 10 years you had this vehicle and all the great trips you've taken yourself or with your families, and start to document it. Build out the guidelines. That content helps drive organic traffic or free traffic that surfaces on Google, which helps renters find you, and we'll post it on our site as well. And it's just valuable information. So that's where I would start first if I was going to focus on marketing my rig or my vehicle. Okay, Toby, here's a good one. Crosses over RVs and your version of hotels. I rented one of the cabins at the Estes Park, KOA, last fall, and it was such a cool experience. Will the cabins be reopening again? And if so, what cleaning measures is KOA taking place for cabins?
Great question. Our cabins are prevalent across the system, both our rustic cabins and our deluxe cabins. And we know people, especially new people just starting out in camping, like to flock to the cabins. So the question, if they're able to be open based off the state or local jurisdiction, the cabins will be open. Sometimes right now in certain parts of the country, for example, this morning I was working on New York, you're not going to see cabins open in New York right now. And that'll change over time as we get into different phases. But if it's allowed to be open, we encourage everyone to go to KOA.com, you'll see the information. In terms of cleaning procedures, many of our campgrounds are implementing a wait period between rentals. So for all corporately owned parks, for example, we're having 48-hour wait periods when someone checks out before we go in and clean it. That keeps our employees safe and then keeps things safe for the next renter. So you're going to see increased measures such as that, and a lot of additional signage such as, you know, and we're doing things differently with linens. Like maybe you have to bring your own linens versus just use what's in there. We're taking the CDC guidelines on how we clean the cabins and how we handle the laundry. So there's a lot of changes in cabins, but we're definitely working to maximize safety in that product.
Awesome. That was a great answer. Thank you. Okay, just so that we can stay close on time, unfortunately, that hour just went by like that. I thought this panel was amazing. So much informative information across all the major destinations that Americans and Canadians can look to travel. We have many resources from our panelists today that we're going to make available in our follow-up to this, and also post it on Outdoorsy.com's blog page, and also our resource center. So that'll include the roadmap for reopening from the NPCA, the park tracker, the video cams or virtual tours of the national parks, all of the information that Toby is talking about with regard to her individual parks and insights around the camping report. And then Justin, we'll make sure that we push out your awesome content as well, and hopefully try and hook you for doing some joint work together on some how-tos. So can I just take a moment to say thank you so much, really. I mean, I know not only to the panelists, but everybody on the line as well. Takes an hour out of your day when we're all so busy. It means a lot. And I would just like to thank Theresa and Justin and Toby for spending their time with us today. Very, very helpful for our community, and look forward to doing more of these, because I think we all noted, like, this isn't a static event. This will change and will be a moving scenario for us. So let's stay connected and really push forward to a bright future in outdoor and camping travel. Thank you guys very much. If anybody has any questions, just email panels@outdoorsy.com, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you to everybody for joining. Appreciate all of your time, and to the Outdoorsy team in particular for running a good series of events.
Thank you.
Thank you.